The end times have arrived. Chaos fanatics and abominations led by Archaon the Ever-Chosen, the free-eyed king and favored son of Chaos, march ever forward from the desolate north with a single goal set before them, to bring forth the end of the world in honor of the Dark Gods. Entire nations of men have fallen, orcs have been wiped out from the world, and the only thing standing against the tides of darkness is an uneasy alliance between the mountain dwarves and the undead legions of Sylvania. Or at least it would be if the damnable dwarves didn't decide this was prime time to exact revenge for a trade dispute that occurred ages ago. As my innumerable hordes of the dead slowly shambled towards the final stronghold of the once proud dwarves, I was left wondering if I should be angry at the AI that decided to essentially throw the entire campaign and condemn us all to eternal damnation, or be genuinely impressed he managed to do exactly what the dwarves in Warhammer lore would do: seek revenge against anyone foolish enough to end up in their great book of grudges. The Warhammer world is a strange place, a combination of everything Games Workshop thought would be cool and badass, all mixed up together and then seasoned with Tolkien's rendition of Middle-earth and Lovecraft's cosmic monstrosities. What this insane amalgamation ended up resulting in is one of the most unique and interesting fantasy worlds I've ever experienced. A universe where your standard clichés are not only embraced but taken to their very extreme. In gameplay terms, this means that unlike previous Total War games where every faction differed only slightly from their neighbors, the ones in Total War Warhammer only share the broad strokes of warfare, with the specific details being unique to them alone. The previously mentioned dwarves base the entirety of their civilization on an impeccable sense of honor and duty, a pair of truly noble ideals they then decided to take way too far. If you ever cross a dwarf, you can rest assured that your name and the entirety of your vile deed will be written in the blood of the High King himself into the Damas Kron, the Great Book of Grudges. Since the dwarf language contains no words for forgiveness, this means that throughout the dwarf campaign you will be oath-bound to exact revenge and retribution against anyone that dare insult the Great Dwarf race. Crossing out the grudges, which is mostly done by beating the other side into a pulp, will net you favor among your citizens, while a full book of unanswered grudges will lead towards general unrest and perhaps even open rebellion against the clearly incompetent High King. Due to the fickle nature of the dwarves, I spent most of the campaign adopting a defensive playstyle, as earning new enemies tends to be far more trouble than it's worth, especially when you have plenty of grudges to settle back home, mostly against the invading hordes of green-skinned barbarians. The orcs, on the other hand, care very little for defense and prefer to simply get into the next battle as soon as possible. This is represented in-game through the fightiness meter that increases as you win battles and crush your enemies, but decreases if you lose battles or hide behind walls like some sort of a dwarf. In true orc tradition, the more successful your war boss is, the more greenskins will start to rally behind him, usually resulting in a wag, an unstoppable tide of flesh and blood that only cares about one thing and one thing only: fighting. What this means is that instead of losing troops as you constantly advance across the campaign map, your numbers will slowly increase as long as you remain on the offensive, eventually ending up with an entire army trailing your primary one, an army you don't have to pay in anything other than blood. It's not often that one gets to play a Total War game as a completely bloodthirsty maniac, so the addition of orcs is definitely a welcome one. The Vampire Counts, my personal favorite race, don't rely on such silly things as archery, artillery, or even taking good care of their frontline troops. What they have instead is a nearly endless sea of corpses to drown their enemies in. Zombies, skeletons, and skeletal zombie dogs all serve as cannon fodder to hide your more powerful units, the various monstrosities that have been forcibly risen from the grave, and the surprisingly effective and diverse set of spectral cavalry that will tear through the enemy's defenses with ease. Unfortunately, the most unique part about the Vampire Counts, the ability to raise the dead when roaming around the world, did not pan out to be as exceptional as it sounds at first glance. This is mostly due to the fact that these units are still expensive, but also because you're only able to resurrect a couple of the strongest ones after particularly devastating battles. Battles that have most likely left you in such a poor shape that you need to return to the safety of your borders. Still, the Vampire Counts have plenty of things going for them, and sometimes just seeing the huge armies of flesh and bone slowly advance forward is enough to send the opposing armies flee in terror. This is great for breaking formations during land battles, but when it comes to castle sieges, it can be downright devastating, as defenders abandon their posts and allow the clumsy zombies to freely shamble up the massive walls. If you're up for a somewhat standard Total War experience, however, the Empire is there to provide exactly that. Their troops mostly consist of peasants with halberds, entire legions of trained crossbowmen, and naturally noble knights riding upon steeds of war. That doesn't last for very long though, and soon enough realism will get thrown by the wayside as you start to recruit massive siege tanks, magical catapults, missile launchers, and knights riding upon flightless griffins. Magical beasts aside, another big difference from previous Total War games is the inclusion of magic, which can range from long-lasting defensive enhancements to full-on tornadoes made out of pure fire. The problem is that most of these offensive spells are nowhere near worth their mana cost, as they do rather meek amounts of damage and tend to move around the battlefield in a random fashion. It makes sense from a lore perspective, as the mortal races tend to have trouble understanding the winds of magic, but from a gameplay standpoint this means you'll be mostly spending your mana on efficient but extremely boring offensive-defensive buffs. In a strange way, the fact that most of these flashy spells are ineffective ended up being a great boon to me, as I frequently struggle with resisting the temptation to ignore battlefield tactics in favor of zooming in up and close and watching the cavalry charges displace entire legions of troops. It is an unfortunate reality of the genre that those playing the game seriously will only see tiny flags and health bars shake around the map, while those in it for the spectacle will probably lose all of their battles, as they are highly likely to miss the skeletal dragon landing amidst their artillery. At least there's always the replay system for post-match gawking. As for the battles themselves, they will instantly feel familiar to anyone that played a modern Total War game, as many of the same unit archetypes are present in Warhammer as well, just wearing a different set of clothes. What this means is that the battles are complex, exciting, and offer plenty of opportunities to carve your own victory out of certain defeat. One of my favorite moments from the campaign was when my already wounded army was attacked by not one but two enemy heroes, something the in-game counter said was destined to be a decisive defeat. Instead of giving up, I managed to make good use of forest cover and cavalry charges to not only survive, but almost wipe out one of my attackers and then raise an even stronger army from their corpses. The enemy AI, while clearly not brilliant, managed to offer me enough of a challenge on normal difficulty that I never felt like I was just cruising towards a victory. A notion that continued until the very end of the campaign, when the forces of chaos simply smashed through all of my defenses and brought about the age of boring to the world of Warhammer. I was warned when I started the campaign, however, that the normal difficulty was a bit over-tuned pre-release, so you may want to go with some of the higher difficulty settings if you're a Total War veteran. While I would love to say everything was perfect when it comes to the combat, there are a couple of issues that require getting used to. The first one is the rather finicky camera controls that either don't zoom in as fast as you want, or end up flipping out all over the place when attempting to move around a battle. Thankfully, most of this can be corrected if you fiddle with the options menu, and I would recommend you do so if you plan to watch the battles in anything other than bird's eye view. The second issue is that I frequently had no idea about what's even happening on the battlefield unless I went with a tactical camera. This comes down to the fact that most of the units for some factions are completely black when looked at from above, so in a battle between black orcs and skeletal swordsmen you would have a really tough time trying to tell which side is winning without looking up the health bars, which themselves could be covered by other health bars. I would love to see an option that gives your units an outline of the color of your choice, as otherwise you have to rely on the pause button far too often, and that is something I don't consider very fun. There's more to Total War Warhammer than fighting, however, and it comes in the shape of the campaign map, where you get to build up your forces, sabotage enemy defenses, gather allies, and then wage war against anyone that opposes you. Wait a minute. Jokes aside, at the start of the campaign you will have to choose a legendary lord that will lead your empire to greatness. Depending on your choice, your armies will be slightly more inclined towards a specific playstyle, but the most interesting thing about these legendary lords is how you get to personally witness their ascent to power through various quests. These quests will appear periodically on a campaign map and usually force you to bring your entire army into hostile territory, with a carrot being a magical artifact of great power. You will start a battle with your entire army at the ready, while the opposition will get a pre-built force that might just be vastly inferior or completely overpowered depending on when you decide to undertake the quest. I don't consider this too much of an issue since the quest battles have always managed to be entertaining, either because of the story or because the often tricky encounter design that might have you face off against overwhelming odds until your allies finally come to the rescue. The fact that you always get a lower important item at the end also means that the stakes are adequately high, so even though it might just be another battle amidst hundreds, it feels fresh. What doesn't feel fresh, and this is probably the biggest issue with Total War Warhammer, is the fact that the end of the campaign is so repetitive. Almost every faction has the exact same goals: destroy 2 opposing nations and stop the Chaos Invasion. No matter how you play through the entire game, the final stretch will be a big climactic battle with chaos followed by a long and boring mop-up of all the factions that still remain on your checklist. It's a real shame because I truly enjoyed what the campaign had to offer, what with each race having their own special gimmick, so I do hope this is something the upcoming DLCs will expand on. As with previous Total War games, you're capable of building up your cities in a variety of ways, with your expansion being mostly limited by your funding and the current level of civil unrest. While it might seem complicated at first, the building process is about as dead simple as it gets, since the buildings all fall into obvious tiers such as unit producing buildings, income generators, trade good generators, prerequisites for bigger units, and so forth. It's not a bad system, but it's clearly not the focus of Total War Warhammers, so it's a bit underdeveloped compared to what you might expect from a strategy game or even a Total War game. Things get a lot more interesting in the research screen that allows you to either enable passive effects for specific heroes and units, or new and increasingly powerful magical abilities. Much like the city building system, it is not very complex, but it does offer you a greater degree of choice when it comes to how exactly you want to specialize your nation, whether that be in diplomacy, combat, expansion, or any variation of those. The final thing worth mentioning about the campaign is diplomacy, a sore spot in almost every Total War game, and unfortunately the same applies to Warhammer as well. Allied AI players will frequently decline your offers to go to war against a common enemy, only to then bring up a counteroffer that requires both of you declaring war against a much more powerful enemy that lies somewhere far away. Worst of all, they will decline payment from you in order to wage a joint battle against Orcish invaders, only to then instantly turn around and pay you to do the very same thing. It is absolute madness. The one good thing I can say is that I've had far more success navigating the political landscapes in Total War Warhammer than in the previous games, with my greatest success story being the fact that I've actually managed to convince one of my AI neighbors to join armies with me and fend off a common foe. It's moments like these when a couple of thousand zombies march in unison towards the enemy lines that make me glad I'm not just playing a Total War game, but one set in such a unique world as Warhammer, given that the end result is often breathtaking, though this could be the inner fanboy talking within me. The last but not least are the technical aspects. You'll be glad to hear that unlike the launch version of Rome 2, Total War Warhammer manages to be mostly bug-free, and the ones that do occur rarely result in the AI committing seppuku. Your mileage may vary, as Total War games can be notorious for their issues, but for all my time with Warhammer I can't say I was ever annoyed with bugs that I would find reason to complain about them. I've heard other people had issues with crashes, but I've had none, so I can't really comment. The performance, on the other hand, might be an issue for a lot of people, as Total War Warhammer requires a hefty machine to run on Ultra, and despite me having a mid to high range gaming PC, I haven't been able to hold a stable 30 FPS during some of the bigger battles. In other words, if you don't have a beastly machine, don't be surprised if you're quote-unquote forced to downgrade some of the settings in order to keep a stable 60 FPS when things get heated up. On the positive side, when you're looking at all the fighting up close, the FPS tends to be fairly stable, so if you don't mind some dips while rearranging your formations, you will still be able to run Warhammer with all of the settings maxed out, and all of the units looking as pretty as they can be. I did exactly this, and even though I occasionally dropped to as low as 20 FPS, I still had no problems given that the drops mostly occur when all of the units are a small blurry speck on the horizon, so do keep that option in mind if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. Total War Warhammer is a crossover between two franchises I've enjoyed for many years now, and I am delighted to say that it manages to be faithful to both sides, but most importantly, an actually enjoyable experience on its own. It has some clear flaws, especially when it comes to the generic campaign ending, terrible diplomacy system, and occasional performance woes, but even with all of that considered, this is the most fun I've had with a total wargame. The factions are unique, the units are exciting, and the battles are often a spectacle to behold, so I do hope the problems get ironed out for future patches and DLCs, as this is a game I would love to keep coming back to for many years to come. Thank you guys for listening, and if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, please do let me know. And if you would like to see more, you can either subscribe here, or you can check out the website link down below. That one tends to be updated a lot more frequently. With all of that said, I hope you guys have a nice day, and I will see you soon. See ya!